Welcome back to We Need to Talk. I'm Darcy Sterling. We've all heard the term fear of intimacy, but most of us don't align with it. We don't generally see ourselves as people who consciously avoid intimacy. And that's the problem with the term. It's not about consciously avoiding intimacy or connection. It happens outside of our awareness. And I've got news for you. We all do it. Today, I want to explore the ways we avoid closeness and connection with loved ones, but not at the extreme levels. I'm talking about soft exits, the ones we all engage in. These are things that look, at least on the surface, like normal everyday activities. Like scrolling on your phone or watching TV or overworking or parenting or needing to do just one last thing before you can finally relax. I want to talk about how those seemingly benign activities can drain energy from our relationships because they keep us too busy for connection, and how eroding intimacy over time can lead to the kinds of exits that tend to be terminal in relationships, like affairs. Here with all the questions is my niece and co-host, Ashton Tardif.
So, based on your intro and from what I've heard so far, it sounds like this topic is very reminiscent of kind of doing the bare minimum in a relationship, which reminds me of the term quiet quitting, which historically I've only ever heard in the context of a job. Basically, doing like the absolute least amount of work, just enough to be in the job, but not enough to like get fired. Right?
Yeah, no, that's accurate. That's accurate. I mean, think of exits or the term quiet quitting as happening on a spectrum. That's a more significant end of the spectrum than what we've been talking about so far. But for sure, partners, I mean, we've all seen them, usually in older people my age or older, not like the elderly, but you'll see couples who are together and you just sense that there's not so much there. You just sense that there's an absence of fire between them. It diminishes the intimacy in the relationship over time is what ultimately happens as you move further and further into the spectrum of exits.
Is it fair to say that quiet quitting a relationship is technically a relationship exit? And if so, what exactly is a relationship exit?
So a relationship exit is when one or both partners does things to distance themselves in the relationship so that they don't have to confront the reality of the relationship. It never happens early on. It rarely happens in the honeymoon because everybody's really happy in the honeymoon. You only see this stuff start to happen in the second stage of relationship, which is organic love. That's the organic love stage of relationship. And in that stage, what you see is partners sincerely trying to find ways to be individuals within the relationship. I don't want to say that all attempts at having an individual life or their own interests, partners having their own interests, is indicative of an exit or quiet quitting the relationship. But what you see is over time, and we'll talk more about how to discern the difference between truly engaging in activities that bring you joy versus exits in a relationship. But you only see this stuff happen in long-term relationships, and you only see this happening in the second stage of the relationship. People aren't doing it early on because things are going smooth and there's nothing that they're actually trying to distract themselves from or to avoid examining deeply.
Yeah. And there's also less at stake. If you're in a shorter term relationship, you're not as invested. You haven't put in as much time. It's easier to leave.
It's absolutely true. There's research about that. The longer you are in a relationship, the more skin you have in the game, the more difficult it is to extricate yourself from it, the more likely you are to stick it out.
So why would anyone avoid intimacy or engage in a relationship exit?
This happens for so many reasons and in so many different ways. So here comes a list. First off, like from the most basic level, intimacy and vulnerability, it can be really uncomfortable. I don't know if you've ever struggled with it.
Hello, I'm human. My heart beats.
But although it's difficult for people, not everybody knows how difficult it is for them or can be for them. I
Mhm.
think you're unusually plugged into your emotions and that you know when it's uncomfortable and maybe you're talking yourself
Yeah, I'll
through
catch
it so
it.
that you can still lean into the relationship. But vulnerability and intimacy can be really overwhelming to people, especially
Mhm.
depending on how they walk out of childhood, which we'll get to at the end,
And attachment style.
which we will get to in a minute. These exits, as I said, are so common in the second stage of the relationship, which is characterized by bickering, by feeling criticized by your partner, by criticizing your partner, maybe feeling rejected or feeling wounded. They are very common in a specific type of attachment style, which we call the
Mm.
avoidant attachment style. And these are
Mm.
people whose caregivers didn't meet their needs. And rather than stay in a holding pattern, waiting and wanting and needing, these individuals, their bodies found a way to shut down their needs. And that served them in childhood. It allowed them to be a good enough fit with their parents so they weren't so demanding that, like, they'd wind up being abused. The attachment style adaptations are literally adaptations. They're the way that humans have evolved to adapt to what is the reality of their caregiving situation. So, for people with the avoidant attachment style, what we often see is that the very thing that served them in childhood now is getting in the way of their relationship because they're not available to their partner.
Mhm.
Sometimes partners sense that they're unhappy, but maybe they lack the insight to know why, or they lack the relationship skills to know how to communicate it to their partners, so
Mhm.
they exit. If someone's emotionally or sexually not being fulfilled in the relationship, they're going to engage in an exit either to distract themselves from the extent to which they're not being fulfilled or to find fulfillment elsewhere.
Mhm.
You know
Hmm.
what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, unfortunately. Yeah.
That is actually
I
that is the
dated
irony is
this.
not the irony just hit me over the head like a sledgehammer. Yes, I know you know exactly what
Oh,
that's
yes.
like.
That's funny. That's how it felt to me too. Um,
Some
so
partners, no, I'm not done. It's a really long list. Stand
okay.
by. Some partners developed a coping mechanism of distracting themselves when they're emotionally uncomfortable, and these distractions are exits. You see that with people who are overworkers. Don't talk about anybody in this room. You see that with people who are obsessed with their hobbies. Also, don't talk about
Mhm.
that. I mean, there were decades when I like trained as if I was going to be a professional dancer, and I trained with professional dancers. We're not here to analyze me and my relationship. Unhealed childhood wounds. Let's talk about that. That's nice and clean.
More fun.
Because relationships trigger our childhood wounds, we learned how to love in childhood based off of how our caregivers loved us and met our needs. And to the extent that they failed to meet our needs, they created a wound. Now, you can be a good enough parent and still have created a wound.
Mhm.
Most kids don't escape childhood without some wounds. Now, when we are in an adult relationship, when we've fallen in love, if we haven't healed that wound, our innocent partner is going to accidentally rub up against that wound. And most people aren't even aware of their childhood wounds, so they don't even know when that happens that there's a way of them self soothing that they can engage in, I don't know, an internal dialogue that basically goes like this. And I'll do it in the way I do it to myself, which is in second person, because when I do this internal dialogue, when I try to talk myself down from being a nut, um, I imagine myself talking to either a teenage part of myself or a very childlike part of myself. Basically, I go back to a wound. I usually imagine that it's like a young, wounded part of me. So I'll say something like, I know this feels really distressing. It feels that way, but it's not really about Steph. It's mostly that you were raised, I don't know, by a guy who breathed terror into every person he ran into, pretty much. He was a pretty scary guy, and he scared people. Steph is triggering this feeling in you, telling myself this, is triggering this feeling in you, but it's not because she's an unsafe person. She's just at times thoughtless and at times does shitty things. but she would never do to me what my stepfather did to me. But I can't have an internal dialogue like that if I don't even know that the pain that I'm in right now is really hearkening back to an old childhood wound. So there's no need for me to react to Steph like a feral animal. If I don't know that I get triggered when she withdraws and becomes like gloomy and broody, I'm going to think that she's about to explode, and I'm going to do to her the same thing I did when I was a kid, which is provoke the fight to get it over with.
Mm-hmm.
And picking a fight is a relationship exit. And
Mm-hmm.
when you have unhealed childhood wounds, you will very organically in your adult loving relationships have your partner rub up against that wound. And that is why it is so important for us to have done our own work or be doing our own examination
Mm-hmm.
and reflecting on when else in my life did I ever feel like this? There's some basic things we can ask ourselves to determine, listen, I like to say it this way. If my response is hysterical, then the problem is historical. That's basically how I do it. If
Hmm.
I'm acting like at a 10 out of 10 on the chart of like escalation, then it's not about the here and now. This is about things that
Deeper.
predate Steph. I've been with her for so long that it is possible that there's compounded wounds from that relationship that I'm in. But most of our listeners are going to be in newer relationships and younger relationships, and let that be your guidepost. If it feels hysterical, it's probably historical. And
Wow.
it's probably not about the here and now. I've always found comfort in knowing that it's not about my partner. It's really about my childhood, because that gives me a sense of agency and hope and optimism. It makes me feel that I can heal it. If I'm willing
Right.
to do the work, I can at least heal it. And
It's
then,
control. You have the
yeah,
control then.
yeah, I just love
Yeah.
control and every package that it comes in.
Well, I understand that. So I also understand the examples that you mentioned in the intro, and they make sense of what relationship exits can look like. But are there some that are perhaps less common that we may not even realize at first?
Yeah, physically withdrawing from your partner. So we can live
Mhm.
without any of our senses except touch. We will die without touch. That doesn't mean that we have to be having wild, passionate sex 24/7. It does mean that if you're in a committed relationship and you've not identified this as a non-physical relationship, your partner likely is expecting you to meet their physical needs, and touching, hugging, hand holding,
Mhm.
PDAs, when you remove that from an intimate relationship, then how is that relationship actually any different from the rest of your relationships? So
Right.
withdrawal from physical touch can be an exit, and certainly, you know, not having sex. Also, storming out of the house when you're in a fight, not sleeping in the same bedroom when that's not been discussed and agreed upon. Those physical changes that we engage in without an explanation and an agreement with your partner, they're exits. Shutting down emotionally, going silent, becoming cold, withdrawing, that is 100% an exit. Clinically speaking, we call it stonewalling. It's one of
Mm.
the worst behaviors you can engage in a relationship.
Yeah.
Rage is worse, but we're not trying I'm not trying to teach you the lesser of evils. I'm trying to teach everybody how to be their best selves. So
Yeah.
that quiet withdrawal, that when you ice out your partner, that is so wounding, and there's nothing
Hmm.
they can do to bring you back. It's one of the most potent power plays in relationships.
Ugh.
The when somebody shuts down.
Yeah, I would prefer rage because at least I'm getting communication of some sort and I can work with that. Stonewalling, I is so triggering. I know it's not just for me, it's for like almost everybody, but
I would much rather have a fight than
yeah,
have
so would
somebody
I.
withdraw. I know they're in it with me. I know that they care. I know that they're
Right.
trying.
And there's an exchange happening there, at
Right. You're not
least.
just hitting a wall.
Yeah.
It's
Hoping something
terrible.
sticks. It's horrible.
Another exit that is less common is over intellectualizing. So relying
Mm,
heavily on
ooh.
logic. Not that we know anybody who does that in this
Oh, that
family.
just absolutely bullseyed straight into my heart. Anyways, continue.
It's true. I mean, relying too much on logic or rationalization to avoid dealing with emotions or addressing your issues head on. Like,
Hmm.
feelings
Yeah.
are valid. It doesn't matter if they don't make sense to anyone else. Everyone's feelings are valid. And the goal in relationships is not to prove why your partner's feelings don't make sense. It's to validate them and
Mhm.
to make your partner feel seen and heard. And if that feels painfully American, we are on the cutting edge of psychology in this country. So there aren't too many things I want to wave an American flag around for, and that's one of them. So yeah, relying too much on logic and your cognitive strengths to navigate your relationships and to prove why your partner's wrong, it's a really dysfunctional behavior. It's a big exit.
Yeah.
And here's one that you might not know of: unconsciously creating a problem child. Parents do that all the time. So remember, the first 15 years of my career, I worked with teenagers, and I sent their parents to the other people I worked with, the other counselors that worked in my agency. And we saw over and over and over again that in some of the most distressing marriages, the one thing that brought the parents together is unity over how fucked up their kid is.
Huh.
And they unconsciously do things to ingrain that role in their child because it keeps them united. They finally have something that they agree
Oh.
on, and it keeps them from having to deal with the
Themselves.
problems in the relationship.
Wow, that is really upsetting to hear because kids don't deserve that. They don't deserve
No,
that.
they don't.
And they
They
don't
do
sign up
not.
for it.
And adolescent and teenage therapists, they're all high-fiving me right now because they're like, yes, that happens all the time. It happens left and right. You know, that's not to say that there aren't times where there's a legitimate problem with a
Right.
kid who needs help, but when family systems or parents are overinvested in underscoring the extent to which, well, we've had others, they weren't bad like this. It's all about them not being wrong. And it's all about making their kid the target of the problem.
Hmm.
When you see things like that, I always know. I always know when parents use that kind of rhetoric with me. That's
And
why
that
I don't
makes
work with
sense.
teenagers anymore.
I'm sure amongst a few other reasons. I wouldn't want
No,
to
I
talk to
love,
teenagers all
I,
day.
no, I loved the teenagers. No, I loved working with teenagers. I love
Really?
teenagers. 100%. They're basically young adults without who are in lockdown. Believe it or not, there's not much different with your brain development than there is with a 17-year-old's. There's not that much difference yet. 10 years has made a difference, but it's not rendered you with a fully developed brain yet. We know that.
I take
So
comfort in that, oddly. That gives me a sense of ease. I can still make mistakes and not beat the shit out of myself for it. I'm not fully developed yet. I'm actually still a child. So, and this might be different based on the person, but are relationship exits something that we do consciously or unconsciously?
you're right. It's
Oh,
based on the person and it's both. So if somebody hasn't done their own work and they fancy themselves super left-brained and logical and rational and like they don't need to go into therapy or do any self-reflection
okay.
because they've got their emotions on lockdown, please believe me, your exits are going to be happening outside of your awareness and you will have a litany of divorces under your belt.
Hmm.
Because what you don't fix in this relationship, the next person pays the price for. It gets replayed. One of the wisest things I was ever taught when I was on the receiving end of my first couples counseling experience was you have to learn how to handle yourself in relationships, whether it's with this person or the next person. And you might as well try with this person because at least you know what you have with this person.
Mhm.
That was quite profound advice. So some people are aware of their desire to avoid intimacy like you. You said vulnerability and intimacy and deep connection, it can be overwhelming. Of course, I'm human because you know yourself. There are
Mm.
many people who don't understand the extent to which they're uncomfortable in the presence of real deep connection. When they're unaware of it, it can cause people to do all kinds of things unconsciously, picking a fight, distancing themselves shortly after a really tight connection with their partner. It can cause all kinds of things. But In some examples, like creating a problem child, that is also happening completely outside of a parent's awareness. In fact, I would argue that those parents can probably pass a polygraph test. That is how blithely unaware they are of the deeper purpose that their problem child is serving in their life. As they complain and have something to garner empathy from their friends and family
Mm-hmm.
about, they are getting support that they would not have if that child was healthy.
I also feel like it could be an excuse. Like, yeah, of course things aren't great right now in our relationship because our child is this massive shitstorm. Again, very unfair to the child.
It is, and the poor kid has no idea that they will sometimes come to therapy being like, I have to tell you, my parents see it in me. They don't see that they do the same thing. But usually they come in and they're like, yeah, I'm a terrible person. I'm a
Mm,
terrible kid. I do fucked up things. I have all my basic needs met. My parents, they put a roof over my head. They make sure that I'm fed, I'm clothed. I have privilege, even privilege.
yeah.
And I don't know why I'm behaving like this. You're behaving like this because there are some undercurrents in the family system that are causing you to be the bleeping radar on the family's compass, but
Mhm.
your parents aren't reading it correctly. And instead, they're distracted by you. They're not seeing that as, wow, my kid is responding to the undercurrents in the system, in the family, in the house, in the home, the tension, the fighting, whatever we're not talking about. Maybe we are talking about it, but it's happening in a less than ideal way. There's a lot of fighting or whatever. The
Mhm.
kids are going to act that stuff out
Yeah.
because actually, through evolution, kids want to be the problem. Because if they're the problem, they can be the solution. Kids are dependent on their parents, they cannot raise themselves. So it is actually more comfortable to be the problem in the family than to have the awareness that the problem is your parents and that their
Right.
relationship could implode. Because without them, you can't survive.
Yeah. You also can't fix it. Like as a child, if you understand, I remember feeling that way. Sorry to mom and dad. But yeah, I remember viscerally feeling that way with my brother. We both were like, oh shoot, dude, something's going on. And we had a quick family meeting, which consisted of 13-year-old me and 10-year-old him. And we decided to pull out old photos of our parents and photos of us from our childhood and lay them all out on the dining room table, light some candles. And we couldn't cook food really because I was like, I want to say I was 12 or 13. So we're like, let's grab some leftovers and heat them up and put them on plates and then go and get them and tell them that we made dinner for them. And we're like, that we're onto something here. That could work because they
That's
weren't
so sweet.
it
That
was
is so
so
sweet and endearing and also sad. It's like this is what
yeah,
kids do.
yeah.
Kids want to make themselves the reason for the divorce or the potential anecdote to the problems in the family.
Yeah, and not to share any spoilers for people who don't know me, but it didn't work. But it shouldn't have worked. It shouldn't have worked. Both my parents are now happy in other relationships, but that really resonated with me what you just said. So I was like, I can't be the only
Yeah.
kid that's felt this way at some point in their life.
No. No, and again, most kids that feel that way don't realize that all of this is an unconscious it's a whole unconscious pattern that they're experiencing. Most kids don't realize it consciously that they're trying to fix their parents'
Hmm.
problems.
Right. So how do exits harm relationships? And does an exit necessarily mean a breakup?
So particularly the ones that we've been talking about today, these softer exits, think of those as like having a little leak in a raft.
Hmm.
At first, it's not going to threaten you, but if you ignore it, you are eventually going to go under. And in a relationship, you guys are just going to drift apart until someone either taps out or commits one of those terminal exits, like having an affair.
Hmm.
These exits, they do lead to increased conflict, usually. The very thing you're trying to avoid is the thing that you attract. We can't avoid things. We really can't avoid things. When we want to avoid something, it puts a GPS, it like lights up our brain, and our brain starts hunting for the very thing that we're trying to avoid. The brain doesn't really understand qualifiers. And long story short, the very thing that you want to avoid is what you wind up unintentionally provoking, particularly through exits. People are not going to tolerate it indefinitely, mostly. Most people are going to call their partner out. It's going to become the source of conflict in the relationship. It's going to create emotional distance between partners, and eventually it's going to deteriorate the relationship.
How do we distinguish between things that we need to do and things that truly bring us joy versus a soft exit?
So, in thinking about this, because I don't like to just dissect and examine a problem without giving a potential solve, this actually took me a long time to figure out what the answer to this question is. Thank you for a tricky question, Ashton. I appreciate it. You keep me on my toes.
Ah,
I've boiled it down to a 4-part process. Start by making a list of your long-term goals. Write down your long-term goals, the things that
with
are
your
important to
partner
you.
or just for
No, by
you?
yourself. You're going to do it by yourself. Let me back up and say, distinguishing exits is a personal thing that we do individually. Instead of taking our partner's inventory and identifying all the ways that they exit relationships, I like to have my clients reflect on their own behaviors to determine the ways in which they're exiting their relationship. It only takes one partner to be a hero to save a relationship. I've
Mm.
made a whole living just working with one person at a time. And I never work with 2 people at a time.
Do you mean to start the process? Because I
Period. The end. I
just
only
okay.
do. Yeah, I only work individually with clients. But Steph, my wife, is the couples therapist. She works with couples. I teach relationship skills to individuals. So when we're
Right.
thinking about distinguishing between things that we objectively need to do and things that truly bring us joy versus soft exits, I want you as an individual to sit down and write out your long-term goals. What are the things that are important to you, that matter to you, that you want to accomplish in your life?
Mhm.
Then, step 2 is to identify your core values, which nobody knows how to do. So there's a quiz that you're going to take to do that, and I'll link to it in the show notes. It's the VIA Survey of Character Strengths. It's going to give you your top 25 character strengths, and really it's going to highlight your top 5 character strengths. Those strengths, they are your values and principles.
Mm.
So that's going to tell you the things that are really important to you. So now you've got your list of long-term goals, and you're going to have your list of your values by taking that quiz. Then you're going to list out all the things that you do that keep you busy outside of your partner. So if that's
Like hobbies or
hobbies, outside interests, anything. So, how is your time spent throughout the day? If you're
Mm.
somebody who is an overworker, and we all know who we are, and I raise my hand here. If you're an overworker, that goes on the list. Has to
Right.
go on the list. It keeps you out of the relationship. Very few overworkers like me at the level I'm at are doing it because they're in dire need of the money. They've created a machine that requires a lot of funding, maybe, but choices can be made to diminish
Yeah.
the pressure that that creates.
That was so self-aware. I know you know that, but I just wanted to give you your flowers.
Thanks.
Who gives a
Thanks.
therapist flowers, you know?
Thanks, Ashton. So
Continue.
you're going to list out all the things you spend your time doing. So if that's like, I'd love to have deep conversations with like 3 of my friends every week, and each one of those phone calls takes north of 30 minutes, that goes on your list. How are you spending your time outside of your 8 hours of work,
Mhm.
outside of a few hours with your partner? What are you doing with your time? Are you watching TV? All the things you do that take up your time. You're going to write out that whole list, things that keep you busy. Then you're going to cross off all the activities and responsibilities on your list of things that keep you busy that align with your long-term goals
Hmm.
and that align with your principles. You're going to cross those off, and whatever's left is a soft exit.
Ah. I'm a little speechless right now just because my brain was thinking, wow, for someone with ADD, making that list is going to be a real treat because it could be like, today I spent 15 minutes filing my nails. for no reason. And then I journaled, but then I saw a bird. And
Right. So maybe it's easier to do it in real time, kind of like a food journal. Most of us wouldn't be able to be super accurate with a food journal if we did it retroactively. So
right,
whenever you meet with a
right.
nutritionist, they ask you for the next 30 days, write down everything you eat every day.
Hmm.
So maybe do that. Do that
Wow.
for a couple weeks. I don't think you have to do it for 30 days. But if you
Mm.
want to be super diligent, do it for 30 days. I'm never going to tell you to work less because I'm an overworker who exits my relationship that way.
That was great. That
It's
just
not
fell
true.
straight into
Listen,
place.
I've done such a pivot in the last year and a half. I have really, really changed that significantly. I do
Yeah.
nothing on weekends.
And now I can
Nothing on
reach you.
weekends.
I can reach you before 9 p.m. sometimes on a weeknight. So I've noticed that. That's great.
And
That's great.
even when you don't reach me before 9, I will always respond to
I
you
know
before you're
that.
asleep, which
Yes.
I wasn't doing for years. I didn't do it for years. If
Yeah.
I was working, which often would go till, I sound like I'm virtue signaling here. There's nothing virtuous about the hours I have kept. Nothing virtuous about that. It's been the bane of my existence, but I did work for a couple decades till about 1 or 2 in the morning, sometimes a little bit
Oof.
longer. And when that happened, it wouldn't matter who reached out to me. You weren't hearing from me until the next day.
Right.
So I've I've cut my hours almost in half in the last year and a half.
Snaps, claps. This is a
Yeah,
big deal. If
whatever.
you know Darcy, it's a big deal. We celebrate her for this moment. Um,
Thanks. So uncomfortable.
I can I can tell.
Like literally squirming in my chair. I'm like, how do I shift the topic?
You're like, damn it, I should have thought harder about having my niece as my co-host because she might know me too well.
That
Um,
is actually precisely why you are, because I knew you could call me out in ways that nobody else would or would have the audacity to. Audacity is not a
oh.
problem for you.
You know what? Sometimes it's not, but sometimes it is. But more on that later. Or never. So we've spent the bulk of this episode talking about exiting a romantic relationship, but can this also happen platonically? And if so, what are examples of that? Because clearly you can't make the comparison of like physical touch or, sex.
Yeah, a chronically unavailable friend is a friend that sucks.
Well, yeah.
And I say that as
Yeah.
somebody who's at times in my life been chronically unavailable to
Hmm.
people. Yes, you have a relationship, you have to imagine it the way you would a plant. It requires watering. If you neglect it, it will die. If you neglect it, it's an exit. So if you're
Mm.
not consistently watering your relationships, you are exiting them.
That is, yep, that makes sense. That adds up. And that also makes me think, are there certain people that I don't want to say avoid, but I feel like there are in the past, there definitely have been people where I have quite quit the friendship.
Have
Just
you?
yeah, and it was more just because I wanted to give my time to somebody else, or those people didn't align with my values long term, or they didn't make me feel the way that other people made me felt. But I also felt badly and I didn't dislike them. You know what I mean? It was hard. It was like, yeah, I don't dislike you as a person. I don't not exactly want you in my life, but I also don't exactly want to give you my time.
It wasn't a
Thing.
matter of just like initially thinking that they would be like a super close friend and then over time realizing maybe not and recategorizing them. This was like an objectively easy person to get along with who you just
Yeah.
randomly quietly quit.
Yeah, it was objectively yes, but then I realized that maybe it wasn't like the level of friendship that I deserved. Maybe it was more surface level than I wanted it to be, that I wanted my very close friends to be. And I realized that they were just looking to me to have fun. Or that one girl that's always down to go out and dress up or whatever. And I was like, wait, I'm actually like a whole human person with real feelings and other things going on. And I don't quite think that you care about those things or you want to hear about them. And so, yeah, I definitely quiet quit a few friendships. But is that a bad thing? Was that wrong of me?
Maybe my suggestion, if we had a time machine and could go back, would have been for you to say, hey, instead of going to a club tonight and me calling my promoter and getting us like able to jump the line, how about if we just go out to dinner and then try and have a deeper conversation and see if the person's capable of it? And if they're not, say, I would just love to have deeper conversations. Like I enjoy hanging out with you, but I want to do more than just like party and club.
Mm. Well, yeah, this was mostly when I was like 19, 20. And I was like, yeah, no, because I did want to keep her as like, a friend for those scenarios as well. But like, it's tricky. We're all learning relationships at that age. And you're also like, your priorities are all over the place because you are a child.
What happened with that relationship?
We drifted apart, obviously. But funny enough, she still reaches out of the blue so randomly and be like, hey, I miss you. I would love to get dinner and catch up. And I have acquiesced a few times and I never regretted it per se. In fact, I enjoyed it, but I got what I needed from that one meeting that could last me till the next year, 8 months, or whatever it may be. Because I like people and people are in our lives for different reasons. And I think I just kind of like put her in her assigned seat, if that
And
makes
I
sense.
think that's okay. I don't think
Okay.
everybody has to have the depth of an ocean with you.
Right. And she wasn't looking to me for that. I think she started to realize, like, okay, we're not best friends. My
And we need
boundaries were
more
in
than
the
best
sand.
friends.
Totally, absolutely. And I think I kind of made my peace with that.
I love a good acquaintance. And seriously,
Why is that so funny? You know what? I do too. And I have quite a few that I really enjoy.
some of my deepest conversations, they happen with Uber drivers and taxi cab drivers. I can go deep so fucking fast with these people. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable. It's like they smell that I'm a shrink. I ask them how they're doing. That's all it takes. We're like 2 feet deep within 2 minutes. It's
Yeah.
amazing. And a good acquaintance is like an interesting thing. You don't have to go deep with an acquaintance.
Right.
You can stay superficial. You can get the social interaction that you need without having to bare your soul. I don't always want to do that.
You know what? I don't either. But I realize this because I love getting deep and I'm fine to share very like innermost workings of my brain and stuff. Like I will do it on like a first friendship hangout because it's not super difficult for me, but I don't always want to do it with the people that are closest to me. And I guess it's just easier. It's easier to do it sometimes to a stranger because there's less at stake. And they also can't call you out on shit because they don't know you.
That right there. Yep.
Okay. I just kind of worked through that in real time.
Some,
I really did. I was like, why do I do that? And I was like, that's why.
yeah, it's a little bit of an exit. It's a way of tempering the intimacy and the connection. It's like
But
you
still
don't
getting
want
it.
all of that. Right.
Right. Oh my God. That
Yeah.
makes so much sense. I love this podcast. I really hope people learn as much as I do when I'm actively on it.
That's amazing. Honestly, Ashton, all that really matters to me is that you're learning. So
Same.
if other people learn from it, amazing.
It's an added bonus, honestly.
So what do you say we hit pause? You want to read us out?
We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling as a Sterling Standard production. This episode was produced by Darcy Sterling. Editing and sound engineering by Bart McGow. Our theme music is by Trending Music. Special thanks to Amanda Christiani, Preston Smith, and Stephanie Sterling. If you know someone who would benefit from this episode, go ahead and text them the link. We'll be back on Tuesday with another episode packed with the relationship and dating hacks you've come to expect.